I'm good. Now, the governor spoke about a slew of things this evening:
That's a good
education,
word.
education, which was grim but also optimistic when you think about the strides that have been made so far. He spoke about capital projects. He spoke about not having to borrow money for operating expenses for the next 2 years, which is a good thing. What can the people of the territory walk away with tonight?
Well, I, I think all of us who are involved in the processes of government recognize that the economic picture is improving. We've had testimony from the director of the Bureau of Internal Revenue about increased collections. Unfortunately, some of those collections come from our residents paying two property taxes in 1 year, which I'm glad is something that we will not see in the future because I certainly did not support it. So I think there's some room for optimism, and I think the governor's approach to optimism is good. But I think there are some things that I needed to have fleshed out more for me. One of the big items for me is the government employees retirement system because so many Virgin Islanders, their livelihood depends on the government employees retirement system. We had extensive testimony from the board, from the actuaries, etc., about what the system needs. And the system needs an infusion of capital. Now, we passed a bill that made some changes, like it extended the retirement age for the new tier of employees, etc. It reduced really in value the package to the new employee. But testimony was clear that what is needed is an infusion of capital. So I'm not quite sure about the governor's approach, and $15 million to me sounds like money, but with regard to the state of affairs with GERS, we have to talk about much more money than that. I'm also gratified that the governor has identified resources to improve government salaries. 21 million, which we recognize again is a small amount. We're talking about less than half of the government employees. And so an important conversation needs to be had about how do you sustain these raises, especially, well, I don't want to say raises because that's not quite true, the step increases. How do you sustain them, especially if it is your expectation to address all of the government employees? Now, I don't know if you recall that last year there was a lot of conversation about expanding the facilities at the West Indian Company. In fact, money had been expended. There were plans on the way to improve the piers, I think to extend to include an additional pier, and that was summarily dropped. We have heard no official references to it again. And even though I can't say to you that I was 100% convinced that that was the way to go, I think we still needed conversations about the impact on the natural environment. We still needed to have conversations about how we alter the natural environment to suit industry. Hovenza is one big example that we can reflect on. Even though those questions were still there, we still had to make decisions in the context of protecting our tourism product in the modern time and from encroachment by our Caribbean neighbors, and especially with the opening up of the ports in Cuba. And the fact that we've had no other reference to that kind of leads me wondering, well, what next with WICO? I was similarly troubled with the discussion about now a new approach to waste management. We have invested in waste to energy. The governor says he isn't pursuing that any longer. And I think I need more information about what this new waste management paradigm is going to look like. I do want to commend him for the work at the senior centers because restoring services to those seniors to a level of at least 5 days a week in one center, I think it's probably one center on each island. But I think we have to look at is still improving the delivery of services to our seniors. Because I know for a fact that my mom went to one of those centers and they were like a family. This is the one in Anna's Retreat. And when that closed, those seniors didn't want to go to find another center. I mean, as simple as it may seem to you, to bring them from Anna's Retreat to Hospital Ground For an older person, that is a disruption for them as well. And so I applaud him for that, but I think we have to look at how we can expand more the services available to seniors. Sometimes, I listen to the language of the governor, and it isn't always that the words match the action. So I would say that because I want to make a point about the role of the legislature. I think the senators, we ought to be very careful that we don't participate in any activities that undermine the role of the legislature. And while the governor would say something like he wants to work with all of the senators and all voices should be heard, we subsequently heard that there was a meeting of only the people who voted for the ArcLight agreement, at least only who were invited. I don't know who all went. And I think things like that really are like doublespeak. And we have to always protect the integrity of the legislative process. There are things discussed there in that State of the Territory address that I believe require legislative action, certainly legislative cooperation. And we have to be very careful. Right now, just an aside from this speech for a second, right now we're discussing in our Finance Committee the creation of a revolving credit facility, which will mean that if we put 8 million into this facility, several agencies, police, EMS, fire, medical examiner, and the office of the governor, because it includes ceremonial vehicles, that once we create this facility, the legislature has been removed from the appropriation and approval process for those kinds of expenditures. And I think we have to be very careful that as a legislature, we protect the integrity of the body in that regard.
Thank you so much, Senator.